They called her Eleanor Waverly, the only child of Colonel Thomas Waverly, a decorated Confederate officer turned sugar baron. Her father was a man of gravity, flesh, and temper, a man who measured worth in obedience and bloodline. By her 22nd year, Eleanor had been presented to 40 suitors, young men of land, faith, and war, but each returned his courtesy and declined. The whispers were cruel. Some said she was unnatural, born of her father's sin. Others said her body, swollen and pallid, was proof of divine punishment. But the truth was simpler and darker. Eleanor had inherited the Waverly hunger, a quiet, unrelenting need to be seen. Colonel Waverly could not bear the humiliation. He viewed his daughter's rejection as an assault on the family's honor, a contagion of shame. His sermons grew violent. His servants began to vanish. By the summer of 1893, the colonel stopped sending invitations altogether. He ordered the windows sealed. He told the overseer to prepare the cellar. That was the last time anyone in town saw Eleanor smile. History remembers the colonel as a veteran, a gentleman, and a man of God. But in his daughter's diary, buried beneath the floorboards, he is something else entirely. The Waverly cellar was older than the house itself, a remnant of an earlier plantation burned to ash decades before. Locals said it was built by convicts. Others whispered it was dug by slaves who were never freed. Whatever its origin, the air beneath the floorboards was thick with memory, salt, rust, and something sweetly decayed. Eleanor had been forbidden to enter it. Yet she heard things. At night, when the house fell silent, she would press her ear to the floor and hear the faint rhythm of chains dragging, a soft moaning that could not have been wind. She once asked her father what lay beneath, and he only said, "Salvation, if you can bear it." Soon, Eleanor began to dream of faces in the dark, faces she did not recognize, eyes glistening with both pity and hunger. The dreams left her shaking, drenched in sweat, her lips whispering hymns she had never been taught. By morning, her father would be gone, and the cellar door would be damp with fresh soil. The priest stopped visiting the plantation that year. The colonel said confession was a man's burden, not God's. And the slaves, those who remained, learned to keep their eyes lowered when the daughter walked by. By late autumn, the colonel announced that Sunday service would be held privately at Waverly Hall. The townspeople welcomed the news. His sermons had become unsettling, filled with talk of purification and obedience of the flesh. No one dared question him, for his war medals still gleamed, and his wealth fed half the parish. Eleanor sat in the front pew, her face pale beneath the lace veil. Behind her, a small group of house slaves were forced to kneel, their hands bound loosely as if in ritual. The colonel spoke not to them, but through them, invoking passages from Scripture until his voice broke into a hoarse whisper. Each week, fewer guests attended, but the chanting from below the house grew louder, pulsing through the wooden floor like a second heart. Eleanor's diary from that season is fragmented. She wrote of shadows moving behind the congregation, of a smell like burnt honey rising from beneath the pews, of her father's trembling hands when he blessed her forehead. That winter, a boy named Josiah disappeared from the fields. The overseer claimed he'd run north. The colonel said no such man had ever worked there. But Eleanor wrote his name 3 times in her Bible margin, then drew a circle around it, as if sealing something in. The colonel's office overlooked the marsh, where the land sank into silence. He spent his evenings there, oil lamp burning until dawn, his heavy boots pacing, stopping, pacing again. The servants learned never to knock. They said the walls hummed when he prayed. One night, Eleanor crept to the door and saw through the crack the thing her father carried, a small glass jar filled with black sediment. He turned it slowly in his hands, whispering names she didn't know, names that felt older than Scripture. The jar pulsed faintly in the lamplight, like a dying ember refusing to fade. When he noticed her shadow, he spoke softly. "Do you know what shame becomes when it can't die, child? It becomes a god." From that night on, he called her to the lantern room before bed. He made her kneel and recite the same verse until her voice shook. Then he would leave her there in the dark, the jar still glowing faintly beside her, humming like a beehive in the walls. By spring, her once sweet voice had turned low and hollow. The servants said she no longer blinked during prayers. On the first Sunday of May, the colonel hosted a feast. Invitations were hand-delivered to every remaining family in the parish, though few accepted. Still, the long table was set, silver, wine, and 3 roasted hogs, each carved into perfect symmetry. Eleanor sat at the head, not her father. Her gown was white and too tight, stitched hastily across the seams. Her eyes darted constantly toward the cellar door behind her chair. The servants brought dish after dish, none of which she touched. The colonel spoke of rebirth, of the new covenant between flesh and soil. When he raised his glass, the candle flames trembled as if in a draught. Halfway through the meal, he demanded silence. From beneath the floorboards came a faint knocking, rhythmic, almost polite. Eleanor smiled for the first time in months. "They're awake," she said. The guests left before dessert, pale and muttering prayers. By nightfall, every lantern in Waverly Hall had been extinguished. Only one remained lit, the one beside Eleanor's bed, flickering as if disturbed by unseen breath. That was the night the slaves began to sing from the fields, low, mournful hymns that didn't sound like any known tongue. 2 nights after the feast, the colonel summoned his overseer. The old man emerged before dawn, his hands trembling, his eyes swollen as if from weeping. He left the plantation that morning and never returned. Eleanor remained locked in her room for 3 days. When she reappeared, her hair had been cut short and her wrists were bandaged. She said nothing. But that evening, the colonel took her by the hand and led her toward the cellar steps. Witnesses from the fields said they saw the lantern disappear below ground, its light swallowed whole. What happened in those hours became the plantation's unspoken secret. By morning, the colonel's face was gray, his uniform disheveled, and his voice gone. He sat by the cellar door, staring at the dirt. When asked where his daughter was, he only whispered, "She's been chosen." From that day forward, he forbade the slaves from praying aloud. The hymns that once filled the fields fell silent. But at night, they said, a woman's voice echoed faintly from the cellar, soft, trembling, and unbearably human. After that night, the colonel moved through the halls like a man reborn. He spoke gently, almost tenderly, to those he once commanded, though his eyes no longer held warmth. He carried with him a small book bound in black leather. The servants called it the binding, for every time he opened it, he read names aloud and crossed them through with red ink. Eleanor's name appeared first. Beneath it, others followed, the names of men who had once courted her, then fled. Each week another line, another name. When the list reached 40, he closed the book and locked it in the chapel chest. From that day on, the house took on the hush of a monastery. No laughter, no singing, no wind through the shutters. Only the steady drip of condensation in the cellar below. The colonel claimed the silence was proof of purity, but those who lived there said it was mourning, the sound a house makes when its soul has been sold. Eleanor began shaping figures from the red clay behind the stables. Small, crude forms, heads without eyes, torsos without arms. She lined them along the window sill, whispering to each as though it might answer. When the overseer asked what they were, she said they were replicas of the ones who wait beneath. By midsummer, there were dozens. The colonel smashed them all one morning, shouting that her idols of flesh would bring ruin. That night, he woke to find the shards neatly reassembled on his desk, each daubed with a thumbprint of blood. The next day, the colonel's prize stallion was found dead by the well, its body twisted as though it had turned to look behind itself and failed. He forbade Eleanor from leaving her room, but the next dawn, new figures appeared on the porch, larger now, their mouths open in silent song. Waverly's bell had once summoned hundreds to prayer, but that summer, the rope snapped clean in half. No matter how they repaired it, the bell remained mute. The colonel took it as a test. He ordered a second bell from New Orleans, smaller, cast from tarnished brass. When it arrived, he hung it himself and rang it once. The sound was low, almost human, like a moan caught in iron. For days afterward, anyone who passed beneath claimed to feel a weight on their chest, as if the air itself refused to forgive them. Eleanor refused to go near it. She said the new bell had no tongue, only a throat that swallowed prayers. The slaves whispered that the colonel had poured ashes from the cellar into its mold, binding the past to every chime. By harvest, no one dared ring it again. But at midnight, it would sound on its own, one hollow note trembling through the fields before dissolving into the wind. Autumn brought floods. The bayou rose and devoured the outer fields, uncovering bones no one remembered burying. Among them were scraps of white cloth and rusted shackles. The colonel ordered the remains burned. Eleanor begged him to stop, saying the river had come to reclaim what he had hidden. That evening she walked barefoot into the swollen water, carrying a small wooden cross. The slaves followed at a distance, pleading for her to return. But she waited until the water reached her chest, then drove the cross into the mud. The current calmed instantly, as though the river were holding its breath. When she returned, her skin was pale and cold. She spoke of voices beneath the surface whispering her name, telling her that she belonged not to her father, but to the ground itself. The colonel forbade her from leaving the house again. Yet each dawn, wet footprints appeared in the hallway, leading from her room toward the cellar door. As the year turned, the colonel called his field hands to the chapel. He read aloud the 40 names from the binding, one by one, his voice cracking with reverence. Each name, he said, represented a soul bound to the family's salvation. When he finished, he took a knife and carved a cross into the pulpit's wood, filling the cut with salt. Eleanor watched from the back. When he was done, she rose and asked where the 40th man had gone, the final suitor who never came forward. The colonel hesitated, then told her there had only ever been 39. But she had counted the names herself. There were 40, the last smeared with ash so dark it looked like absence. That night, she tore the page from the book and hid it beneath her pillow. The next morning, she woke to find the page blank, her hands streaked with soot. That winter, the singing returned, not from the fields, but from beneath the floor. Soft, rhythmic, neither joyous nor mournful, a single melody repeated endlessly until dawn. The servants began to leave one by one, claiming illness or divine warning. The colonel replaced them with hired men from distant towns, but none stayed longer than a week. Eleanor began to hum along with the unseen choir. Her voice blended perfectly, as if she had always known the tune. The colonel begged her to stop, promising anything, jewels, books, even freedom from the house. But she only smiled and whispered, "They forgive me when I sing." When the first frost came, the colonel sealed the cellar door with brick. Yet the sound continued, clear as ever. Some said it was air trapped in the walls. Others swore it was confession, the echo of Everys and the Waverleys had buried. And through it all, Eleanor's voice grew stronger, until it was impossible to tell if the house was singing through her or she through it. The colonel declares a month of fasting to purge the household. Food spoils overnight. Eleanor drinks only water drawn from the cellar well, saying it tastes of copper and memory. The fasting drives the servants away. Only silence and the echo of dripping water remain. Eleanor paints her father's face on the parlor walls with ash from the hearth. Each morning the portraits change, eyes closed one day, open the next. When the colonel scrapes them clean, soot bleeds back through the plaster. A priest arrives from Baton Rouge, hoping to reclaim the family. He opens his Bible to read, but finds every page replaced with the same line: "He shall reap what he buried." He flees before nightfall. His horse is found trembling by the gate. The colonel begins writing by candlelight, recording each sin in a ledger that never seems to fill. The ink runs dry, yet words keep appearing, entries written in another hand. At dawn the book smells faintly of soil. Every mirror in Waverly Hall fogs from within. Reflections move a second too late. When Eleanor looks, she sees herself thinner, calm, and smiling as if relieved of all burden. Locals report seeing a pale figure walking the levee at dusk, followed by 40 faint silhouettes. No footsteps, only the soft rhythm of humming. The town's minister orders the bridge closed. The colonel pours wine for supper. It turns black before it touches the rim. Eleanor tells him it is the same wine he poured on the ground the night he bound the names. He refuses to drink again. An early frost kills the cane crop. The plantation's books collapse. Debt collectors vanish after visiting. The bayou ices over for the first time in memory, a smooth mirror hiding the drowned fields beneath. The colonel attempts one final sermon in the chapel. No words come. He mouths shapes of prayer, but no sound follows. The congregation of two, Eleanor and the butler, kneel until their knees bleed. In the night, she hears a boy's voice outside her window whispering hymns. She knows the name, Josiah, the field hand who vanished. When she answers, the voice thanks her for keeping his song alive. Rain returns, heavy and constant. The cellar bricks crack. Muddy water seeps upward carrying shards of clay figures. Each one hums faintly when touched. Eleanor gathers them like relics and lines them by her bed. He wakes screaming that his skin is not his own. His hands blister with salt. His hair falls away. He orders the doors opened, claiming the house is suffocating under its memory. The moment the shutters lift, the river wind extinguishes every candle. At midnight, 40 distinct voices chant from the cellar, reciting verses backward. The sound grows until the walls tremble. Eleanor kneels, calm, whispering each line in unison. The colonel weeps. Unable to endure the voices, he sets fire to the chapel. The flames stop at the threshold as if afraid to enter. Only the pews blacken. The cross remains untouched, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Eleanor writes a final entry. The earth has forgiven him. Now I must teach it to forget. The pages beneath her words are damp, the ink lifting away like breath on glass. Morning arrives with no birdsong. Smoke drifts from the fields though nothing burns. The colonel is found seated in the lantern room, eyes open, pulse gone. The black jar lies shattered at his feet. That a new owner purchases Waverly Hall and raises it. Workers uncover a dry hollow where the cellar once stood. No bones. Only a circle of clay figures arranged like a choir around a single empty space. Decades later, the parish disappears from state records. Only one note survives in a church registry. Property cleansed, voices remain. Travelers still report hearing hymns rising from the swamp, 41 in number now, the last voice belonging to a woman who sings without breath.